Okay, so we already talked about the preamp section, the equalizer. We explained the equalizers. I say that in this special board we have a shelving high filter that is pushing all the high frequencies from a fixed frequency. It's pushing all the highs up or down. We have a mid-range. You can see the knobs here. You can choose the frequency. You are moving through the frequency spectre, the frequency, and with the other knob you are going with the frequency up or you are going with the frequency down. In this mixer you can choose the bandwidth with the Q parameter, but you can choose the frequency and how much do you want to add or cut. And you have the cut, the low shelving that you can push, since from a frequency you can push all the loads up or down. And with this button you activate the cut, the low cut or the high pass filter. The equalizer should be, or you can separate the use in two main uses. One I can describe like the technical use, and the second one is like the cosmetic use. The technical use is like I use it like mostly if to cut or to fix something that is not good on the signal. If it has resonances or some bandwidth, or is used with too much highs. For example, a voice has much of the S sound, like and it's really annoying for you. You can use the high to cut a little bit, and you'll be cutting that. So that is like a technical use for the equalizer. You are fixing a problem in the signal. Or maybe you are moving the frequency and you are cutting a special frequency because it was moody. You can call it like moody in the sound spectrum when you hear like so much like this, because mostly of the signals of the instrument will act in that range of frequency. So if you could like a center like low mid frequency, you will cut that and you will listen more clearly the signal. So this is like a technical use, like you are cutting what is not being right. Or the cosmetic use should be or could be like something like the bass has not enough bass. Like it's cosmetic. It's like for your taste you want a little bit more of something. It's like to make like the signal looks more beauty, or you can listen it more beauty. Then we have the buses, the aux buses. This, how I told before, the signal through the channel is flowing in this way, like vertically. That's a word? Vertically? Okay. And interact with the other signals in this horizontal way. It's like you mix in the horizontal way, and you can use the bus sense to mix. So there is a special parameter that you have to understand here, and is the send will be pre-fader or will be post-fader. That is important. For example, we are in a live show when you have your PA system here. The public is listening through this mix, so you have already your mix done with your signals and everything. And at the same time, you are using the aux bus 1 to a monitor mix in the floor for the singer or for the band or whatever is in the show. So you will need to use this to make him a mix. For example, the musician especially need to listen the voice really low. The voice should be the 5 in this example, So if we want to hear, you just give to the 5 the amount of signal that he needs. Okay. Last time I forget to mention that as the same way that these buses, like the stereo bus, has the master fader to let the whole mix get out of the mixer through these outputs, the aux buses also have their master fader, and it's just in a knob here. So even if I am lifting like all the signals, I am giving a lot of bass, guitar, piano, voices to that mix, it will not sound on the monitor unless the master fader or the master output or that sense is open. Okay, so here's where the pre or post fader parameter goes in game, because I need to have separated mixes for the monitors and for the people, because in this example the voice is the number 5, and for example the vocalist need to really listen to himself really loud, like because he needs to sing well, have the right note, intonation and everything, but he will always try to listen to himself like louder than the other guy, so that will not work in my mix, because I need to have like everything in control and make the mix is pleasant for everyone there and not just the voice really loud. So the aux sense is always the number 1 in every, I think in every analog mixer is pre-fader. What does that means? That even if the fader is in 0, this will be sending signal anyway, because the send is pre-fader. It doesn't matter where the fader is. It's really high, really low, or really below, or in 0 is cut. It doesn't matter, because the send is pre-fader. This will be sounding it will be sounding on the monitor. It doesn't matter if the fader is cut. So the other option is to have it like post fader. That is interesting, this kind of sense, because it doesn't matter if you have like the knob give it to the maximum. If you don't lift the fader, it will not be sending the signal. So it's like for pre-fader signals, the signal is flowing through here like water. You have to imagine that, I told you. And you open the pre-fader send, and doesn't matter if the fader is down, the signal will be taking this different way and flowing through here. But in the post-fader way, the signal, you open the door, but the signal will be going to the fader, and after the fader will be returning to getting down. So, for example, how do I use the post fader is an streaming service. For example, in my church we have like the nursery has a TV with they can see what is happening in the meeting and they can hear everything. So I just use a post fader send. I put the fader in a special amount of send, like everything for 75%, for example. So the door is open in the same level for every signal. The door is just open, but it's post fader, so the same amount of mix that I have to the public in the room will be the same amount of mix that is happening here, because it is post fader. If I push harder the fader, it will be going harder in the post fader sense. If I cut it, it will be lower here, because just the door is like open. freely open. And the other use that they have is, for example, for effects. But before speaking of effects, I will speak about this third connection that is here, that is called insert. This is very interesting because just for one connector, just for one plug like this, you can have like two signals flowing through. So, for example, the insert is very famous and very used on dynamic process. For example, a compressor. We will talk later about a compressor, but a compressor is a dynamic processor that, for example, the signal, we saw it in the board, like has an attack and then a release of something. So the compressor, you can cut the attack and the release and have it like shorter. For example, is very useful with kick drum. It's a very common example. The drummer is pushing or is hitting the kick drum, and in the chorus he goes harder and it sounds harder. Or if a long show, in the last song he's a little bit tired, so the hit doesn't have the same impact as the beginning. So you can control that with a compressor, making that the highest point is not so high, is a little bit lower in dynamics, so even if the hit is not so strong, you will have, or so much stronger, you will have like the same sensation of the volume will be constant. So how do you use it? You, through a cable like this one, with tip connector, sleeve connector, ring connector and a sleeve connector, you will be going with two cables to an outboard processing. So sorry, we don't have it now, but let's think that, well, this is a compressor, okay? Have in your mind that this is a compressor. So I put a cable here and I go with the tip of the cable in the input of the compressor. I tweak the knobs, I compress the signal, and then the compressor has to have an output because it's an outboard gear. You have it in a rack in the side of the mixer. So with this cable, you go to the compressor, you compress the signal, and then you take the compressed signal with another cable and you go to the same connector. This is a special kind of connector. It's called like Y connector because it's one tip here and in the other tips it's separated. So you have your outboard gear connector here. So you tweak the gain, the signal go through the cable to the compressor and come back here. So you can compress every signal if you have different compressors for each one. That in one time was super expensive. Each compressor was super expensive. So for live shows, like really big, huge live shows with 60 signals, you have to have a rack with 60 compressors, each one for one of the channels, each one with the cables. It was a mess. That's why digital technology is so useful in so many stuff that we are going to see it in the next board. But you can use the insert to insert a process to the signal wherever you want. But for example, what happens if I want to put reverb or delay for the voice or for the snare drum or whatever? I can use the insert. I clearly can use the insert, but what will happen, or what happened in the past, that for example this time it will not be a compressor, will be a reverb effects. It was so much more expensive than a compressor that was like almost impossible to have one for each channel. Was impossible to have to one for one channel, so because they were so expensive. So you have one or two maybe in your rack, but if you use it in the insert, for example, for the same example, the 5 is voice. If I put it in the insert, I will be wasting my device, my outboard device, just in one channel to use the reverb. So how it should be used? I connect the output of a send, the output of a auxiliary bus to the input of the reverb device. For example, I will choose the second one, but in post fader. I will not push the button of pre-fader. So I open the main gate, the master output of the second auxiliary, and for the output, the physical output, I go and I connect to the reverb. So in this case, every signal that I push or I lift the knob of the send will be sent to the reverb. So I can send different signals to the reverb. I can send every vocal to the reverb, so I can have reverb in every vocal, or in the percussions, or in the drums, or in every signal that I want. So what is happening now? I am sending signal through this bus and through the main and the cable to the reverb, but I am not coming back to the mixer because the signal is just here. I had to pick the outputs, and usually that what engineers done in that time is just with the outputs comes to different channels. So that was super nice because now I have my main signal, for example the voice in the 5, and now in these two channels I am returning with the reverb, so I can blend. I can decide how much voice I want and how much reverb I want. And at the same time, something extra is I can open the first aux and I can give a lot of reverb in the monitor of the singer, because usually the singers want to hear themselves with a little bit of reverb because it helps them to sing better, to have any special effects. It makes the song longer and it has a different color and it's so much nicer to sing with effects. So you are using on and aux post fader, especially post fader, because if I use a pre-fader to go to the reverb, when I push down the fader, the send will be acting and I will receiving signal on the reverb and in the return of the reverb. And I don't want that. I don't want to push the fader down and just hear the reverb. You never want that. You use it post fader because in the same way that you push up the fader for having more voice signals, you want more reverb. But if you push it down, you want to cut the reverb at the same time. That is why this send is used post fader.